Welcome to How I See It with me, Mark Pratt, and
Justin Sternberg. This is a podcast that works to counter cultural polarization through thoughtful conversations.
hey,
It's running.
that's right. It's
The
running.
numbers are counting up. It's a good sign.
We're gonna remember that for a while.
You know what you should say? You should say, I hear you.
I hear you. I hear you. I hear you. I hear you. Oh, I hear you.
We just listened to just a little bit of the past episode, and
Yeah, recognizing some.
Mark heard me a lot.
I did. I was trying to think of what that's called when you say something too much. A euphemism, is it?
Well, we call them Markisms.
Markisms. Yes, because Mark has too many isms. Where he does have catchphrases, I'll call them.
Catchphrases, that's
Yes.
right. That's right.
Yes.
It's like like one of those old timey detective shows. You know, you got
Yeah.
a catchphrase or whatever. Yours is, I hear you.
I am working on it, though. And I think that's another part of this.
Yeah.
I think it's like teaching, it's like anything like that. You have to be able to do it. You do it, and then you recognize what you can improve on.
Yeah.
Because we haven't arrived yet.
Yeah.
And as I think about it, I hear you has meaning to me.
Yeah.
But when it's used too often, it becomes redundant.
It loses meaning.
Yes, and I think it started even some ways from early on, and maybe even counseling to a degree, of the ability to say, I'm acknowledging what you said, but I may not necessarily agree with you.
I hear you.
Yeah, it's different. It's because when we say okay, that can sound like affirmation. And then someone might be saying, I just beat my dog. And we want to hear them and recognize that happened. And I think that was my way of adjusting to not being able to say okay.
That was Mark's way of the typical like psychologists nodding their head and go and then writing in their notebook.
Yes.
That's your version of that.
Yes.
Like shoving their glasses up on their nose and then writing on their. That was your version. I hear you.
Yes. Yes.
I like it.
Maybe not quite that affirmatively, but yes.
Okay.
Yes.
No, just the scribbling in their notebook, and you're like, "What are you saying about me?" That whole thing.
Yeah.
Only you're just saying, "I hear you."
I hear you.
Yeah.
Because I think there can be a certain empathy that's there.
Yeah.
But I have to admit I can overuse statements.
Yeah.
And that's part of this.
What's the other one we like to pick on?
For me,
Like I say.
That's
honestly one of my favorite things
Oh,
you
yeah?
do. So I hope you don't give up on it.
it's not a matter of giving up,
It's an ism that I enjoy.
but it's how often you use it, I think.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I hear
So
you.
yeah. So this is how I see it. There's a
is
little
how I
bit
see
of
it.
how I see it right there.
That's good.
Where that came
I
from.
like it. We also recognize the past episode. There was a few awkward pauses there, little breaks. At least for me.
But we
And,
we realized if you listen to it in fast time,
we sound brilliant.
exactly.
Everyone should do that. When you listen to our podcast, just go to 2x and we will sound
much faster.
so smart. Our thoughts just come out so
and it'll fly by.
It will fly by,
Yeah.
It's double benefit. That's actually how I listen to podcasts.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then when I listen to normal speed, I'm like, they don't sound as smart. It's
wow.
weird. Yeah.
Wow.
But I know they're smart because that's why I listen. But it's weird.
That's how you see it.
Yeah.
You've learned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, at the beginning of the last episode, I said, this is Mark Pratt. And I got a little worried that everyone, since they couldn't see me looking at you saying, this is Mark Pratt, that they were thinking it was me saying, I'm Mark Pratt. And I could never carry the Mark Pratt name. So.
You don't want it.
No, I don't want it.
You be Justin.
I'll be Justin.
That's right. You're good Justin.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes.
Thank you.
No
You're
doubt.
also a good Mark. So.
Well, either way.
Yeah. And if you weren't Mark, we wouldn't have Markisms. So.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. But that brings us to our topic for today.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not really a good segue, but it's...
Well, it is.
Is it? Let's talk.
In the sense of who we are is very much developed by our sense of, or our ability to exhibit integrity.
Right.
So, yeah.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about integrity. And we're going to just explore it a little bit. Talk about what it is. Kind of some questions around integrity. And maybe even dispel some myths, hopefully.
Yeah.
About integrity.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. No doubt. So as we think about integrity, what makes it important to you, Justin?
So before we get to why it's important, do you mind if we talk about what it is a little bit?
No, I guess
is that
that's
the same thing to you?
In some ways, yes.
Okay.
But that's okay. Are you asking me what it is from my perspective?
Yeah, I would like to know what is, in your Mark's dictionary.
Sure.
What is integrity?
And I think for me, integrity is what I'm saying and what I'm doing most often tend to match. That I'm not necessarily saying, I'll be there, I'll show up, and then I don't. And I think for me, that can even actually be a pet peeve of mine.
Yeah.
Is when someone says they're going to do something and they don't.
Yeah.
And I find myself at times, even I'll be honest, if a person does that routinely, I will tend to distance myself from them. Because, it's at that point I realize how important integrity is. Because if I'm depending on you, I'm asking you for help, and you're either not showing up or consistently late. I'm not saying that, but it's like, I don't want to make myself or put myself in a vulnerable situation to have needed help or asked for help, and that person isn't there. That's kind of that's my perspective, and granted it's personal, but I think integrity is a personal thing.
Yeah, and so there is some key topics that kind of tie into it would be vulnerability and trust. I think those things kind of are the two outcomes of having integrity versus not. Maybe
Consequences, if you will.
Yeah, consequences.
Yeah. What is it for you?
For me, so this topic is kind of a hobby horse of mine, right? We've talked about this before, and integrity, the way I kind of understood it, for most of my life, was this idea of this stuffy, buttoned all the way to the top of your collar or whatever. It just kind of like, you do everything right, you look down on people who don't, it's just like goody kind of thing. And so I've kind of morphed my understanding of it into more of what, kind of the structural integrity. So if you think about in terms of a foundation of a building, right? And how if that foundation isn't built well, it doesn't have structural integrity. Well, none of the structure built on top of it will have structural integrity. And so you'll have issues arise in different parts of your house because it's, the foundation isn't structurally sound, right?
Sure.
You might have leaks, you might have, settling issues or whatever, right? Cracks, exactly. And so integrity to me is the structural soundness between like what you were saying, what you say and what you do, but I think more importantly what you think is aligned with what you say and what you do.
Oh, sure.
So, basically you don't have this vision of who you think you should be and then this other version of who you are. And integrity to me is aligning those two instead of it being a Venn diagram, right? Like, here's who I think I should be and here's who I am. You have those two ends of the Venn diagram. Instead, bringing that closer and closer together to where hopefully there's not a Venn diagram. They're the same thing. To me, that's integrity.
Your two circles, if you will, overlap.
Yes, as much as possible.
Yeah, to where what I think is really kind of who I am. Mm-hmm. Even if people might disagree.
Even if I'm wrong.
Yes.
Right.
I'm still open to the ability that I can be wrong, and I'm not just holding to something because it's a hobby horse of mine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
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 And I think it's interesting. I'm going to kind of shift a little bit. Who are we talking to, or what is our desire from having this conversation over integrity? How do you see that? Or I can go with that, or you can go with that. What's your thoughts there?
So when I think of this particular conversation, the people that I most would want to hear this and understand this is me when I was younger. The 20-something-year-old me who had these lofty visions of who I was and who I was meant to be, but my practical output of who I was not matching it. And so, I was very defensive, and I thought I was responsible, but I actually wasn't. And when I failed my responsibilities, rather than taking ownership, which to me is integrity, saying, yes, I messed up, that is integrity. Again, this goes back to my original definition. Integrity was someone who didn't mess up. That's not what I believe anymore. What I understand.
That was part of the button up altogether image, if you will.
Exactly. But I've learned to understand that integrity is saying, sometimes I mess up, and when I do, I will take ownership of that, and I will deal with the consequences. I will take responsibility for those consequences and deal with that. And that's something that I did not do well in my early 20s. I blamed others. If something came to me, I'd be like, well, I wouldn't have done that if it wasn't for this thing or this situation or this person. It's just, but at the same time, I thought I had integrity. I thought I was honest and true. But looking back, I just see how the vision of myself I had in my head was not aligning with the vision that everyone else got. Or the version that everyone else got.
And I think you bring up a good point, the difference between my image and my integrity. Mm-hmm. I may desire to portray a certain image, that I have it together, but yet I think that becomes counter to our integrity, to the point of being able to say, yeah, I don't have it all together. Mm-hmm. And that's part of who I am. And I think that is a strong dynamic of leadership and integrity. When I'm able to say, I don't have it all figured out and I need your help, versus maintaining an image that says, or like you might have desired to portray, that I have it all together.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you mentioned that being a strong trait of leadership. Well, then that means we have to have a whole episode on leadership and what true leadership is, because, there's a lot of leadership that's exhibited, most leadership, I would say, in the public eye that does not exhibit. It's about being strong. It's about looking strong. It's about hiding all flaws. And that's not the kind of leadership that I embrace or I believe in. I want to see a leader who can admit when they're wrong, who can be vulnerable.
Yes.
But it's a whole
and I think that's where I draw the line between image and integrity. Mm-hmm. Because if I want to portray that I'm powerful, just for the sake of that, I think that's empty, like
Yeah.
image can be. But I think we can, through integrity, we can develop an image that matches
Yeah.
to where people say, okay, yeah, Justin Sternberg, yeah, he'll do what he says he's going to do,
Yeah.
and he'll have honest conversations with you.
Mm-hmm.
If he sees something or you invite him into your life, you're going to hear, what he sees.
Mm-hmm.
And likely you'll find out that, okay, that's helpful in your gaining truth about who you are. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think that's part of, it's bigger than image, but yet it becomes who we are.
When I think about, when you mentioned image versus integrity or whatever, I think of the word duplicitous, right? Like,
Sure.
we have a tendency to be right. It's that separation of who we are from who we think we are, or who we're projecting to be in. It's biblical, right? The Bible says a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways, right?
Sure.
I think it's a paraphrase.
Yeah. No, that's, yeah.
And it's true, because it's so difficult to maintain both of those things.
Yeah.
And so it's so much better if we can just say, let's stop maintaining both and maintain one. And let's make who I actually am improve.
Yeah.
Versus like projecting that I'm better than I am. No. Let's work on the core issues. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
and I think what you were stating almost what I had in mind, as far as, if we view ourselves as believers as being one thing on Sunday and then another thing throughout the week, that's duplicitous. That's religion, if you will.
yeah.
Versus the relationship that says, no, I bring who I am as a believer to all aspects of my life. And that's, it is that fundamental dynamic of my character as a believer that I personally hold to integrity being important as part of that. So that I would not be duplicitous in the way I live my life.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would also say too, like, the more that we are duplicitous, the easier it is to be duplicitous, right? So, your I guess the concept about church, right? Like, if I'm one way on Sunday and another way on Friday night, right?
Yes.
And I wouldn't want my Sunday peeps to see me on Friday night and vice versa.
Yeah.
There's a good chance that's not the only way that I'm lacking in integrity. Does that make sense? Because the more you're trying to maintain two versions of yourself, the easier it is to maintain those two. And not easier is the wrong word. I don't think it's ever easy. I think we're not meant to do that, so it's always difficult. But there's something natural to that, right? Like, I've already got this persona going over here, so I can do this in this persona.
Yep.
And I can also probably do this in this persona, and I can also probably do this in this,
Yeah.
But this other persona, I can't, and I have to be this way and not do those things. And yeah.
And I think exactly what you're saying there is what makes this topic for us important to younger individuals. Because I think we are developing that lifestyle habit, if you will, that basically says, okay, I can be this way here with these people, or I can be this way here with these people. And it's about who it's more about who I surround myself with, or who I am currently around, versus who I am.
Yes.
Regardless of who's around me.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about this a little bit before we were recording, but as children, like I was saying, like a large part of what happens as children is that we are programmed, right? Like, and that sounds so sinister, but it's not. Like, we're teaching our children to live a certain way. We expect them to abide by certain cultural norms or whatever, and like we program to be them to be a mini version of us as much as we can, right?
Help me understand the difference when you say programmed. Difference between programmed and teaching or learning for you.
I'm using programming as a hyperbolic term for teaching and learning.
Okay.
Like,
yeah,
I think no matter how much you try and teach or train your children correctly, whatever that looks like, they will come out of being a child with certain beliefs held only because it was given to them.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by programming. And I don't mean the adults are doing the bad things. I'm just saying, like, that's the nature of being a child, is you adopt beliefs. They are programmed into you. You would take them in, and there's no reason to remove them or whatever, or to question them. You're a child. You just take it as true, and you move on with your life, right?
I hear you. And I said, just as I say it here, I still heard that, but I was thinking about it from the aspect of what, in other words, as a parent, what I'm teaching is what I'm doing. If I'm teaching with my words, but my actions aren't the same, I can see that as being a programming, if you will, because I'm actually conveying that my words and my actions don't have to align, which may actually be counter to what I may desire to teach.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I when I think about that difference, I think any area where I desire to teach something that's different than my actions, I'm actually offering confusion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Instead of programming
and
or learning.
To kind of get back to what we're talking about, why this matters is, again, no matter how good a job you do as a parent, your child will come to a place when they're no longer a child, and they have to figure out, what the heck do I believe?
Yeah.
What the heck do I agree with? And figure out what parts of the programming they keep, what parts they discard.
Yeah.
How to reprogram, right? In some cases, I'm not who I thought I was. I'm actually different or whatever. And so that time that you're referring to,
yes,
right? The young adult period is when all of that crazy stuff's happening. That
Yep.
20-year-old version of me, that's when all that's happening, right?
Yeah.
And it is a hard time because you're figuring it all out and figuring out what's true, what's not, and sometimes you're testing the waters to see, I think about like drugs and alcohol, right? It's like, I've been told my whole life these things are bad and dare to say no and all that. Well, what's the harm? I want to see, and so it's so easy to try it and go down that road, because it's like, my parents were wrong about this thing. Why wouldn't they be wrong about this thing?
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing. Coming back to integrity, I would want them to understand, me to understand, that the actions that you do aren't what define you, right? And so,
what do you mean by that?
What I mean is, if you drink alcohol or you try drugs, like, I would encourage you not to do that, especially the illegal way or whatever. But if you do it, it doesn't mean you now are that person.
Okay.
And it's such who we are is not defined by the actions that we're doing or the people that we hang out with or all those things, which is what you were kind of saying. Like, we tend to become whoever it is in whatever setting. And what I would want to be understood is that that's not required.
Sure.
You can rethink. You can go, is this who I am? No, it's not. I won't do that again.
Yeah.
And I can do that at 38 years old,
Sure.
right? I can lose my temper at my kid, which happens sometimes, right? And I can go, that's not who I want to be. I don't want to do that again.
Sure.
And that's the same, you know what I mean? It's not that different than those situations. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's why I ask. I guess I'm just thinking about it from why this is important and how we want to, yeah, because like you were saying, it's fundamental or foundational.
Yeah.
And I think, being able to understand that our value is also important there.
Mm-hmm.
And we can tend to we might sometimes lose sight of that in the midst of, and I guess that's what makes it important and why it matters, because we're thinking about it from a developmental foundation.
Yeah.
Over time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which we're kind of jumping around a little bit. That's okay.
Yeah.
It gets me to the question about, because you said over time. One of the questions we have here is, how do you get integrity? Like, you can't just, walk into the general store and fill up a bottle of integrity, right? And
yeah.
At the
5-gallon bucket full of, give me a 5-gallon bucket full of integrity. Right. I need it today.
Right.
Yeah. And I think for me, integrity, I think, is like, well, it's a learning, but I think in some ways it's like an instrument, because I think we learn how to do something by playing the wrong note, making mistakes, and then being able to recognize, oh wow, that didn't sound quite like I wanted it to sound. And being able to, because I think it can be a misconception to think that I can just choose to have integrity and I will instantly have it. It's an instantaneous process, because I think integrity is something that's like trust. It's built over time through a process, and I demonstrate it even when, or especially when, the stakes are high, or it may be very uncomfortable to demonstrate. But that's how I know, kind of to the degree when I learned it, to the degree that I've learned it, is when I demonstrate it regardless of what consequences I may face for having integrity.
That's good. It makes, your analogy about practicing music is so applicable here, because you don't just walk onto stage and play that hard piece, right?
Yes.
And same with integrity. Like, those difficult times are when the proof comes out, right? Like, that you have integrity or you don't.
Yeah.
But you don't walk onto that stage and prove your integrity. You practiced it in the little things,
Sure.
And so, like, with music, you're sitting in your room, no one's paying attention, and you're just going over that one part over and over. It doesn't sound pretty. No one wants to hear that. You practice that one, progression there 500 times. No one wants to hear that.
Exactly.
But it's that 500 times that says, when you get up on that stage, I can do this and do it well, right?
Yeah.
And integrity is very much like that, where, how do you get it? Well, you start today and you don't stop, and you practice it in the little things. I think it's inaccurate to think you can practice it in the hard things, because if you don't have the strength from the conditioning, when those hard things come, you'll buckle. It's natural, it's human, it's the nature of things, right?
Sure.
So.
And I even think about it from the definitions of integrity. Integral, one. I think about the two circles coming together as close as they can be to be one.
Integrated.
Yes, to where I think about the 500 times that I've played a segment of that song or that music, that piece, to be able to play it once in its fullness. Mm-hmm. And I think, that's a definition of integrity, is that wholeness, that I'm not divided but yeah, I've been divided, or I've played a divided section enough to say, okay, this is what integrity looks like. And I can tend to, I'm not saying this in a judgmental fashion, but I can tend to see it at times in my own life, and I can tend to see it in others by the wholeness that I see.
That's a really good point, because I think if you're not practicing integrity, it's difficult to see a lack of it in others, which is can contribute to that this pain cycle of pain, right? Like, I'm around people who don't have the best character, which causes me not to have the best character, which causes me to make bad choices, which puts me even more, and like that kind of that cycle. Yeah, and it's what comes first, chicken or egg? I don't know. I think you do both, right? Like, you try and separate from, those that will bring you down. That's a key important thing. But also practicing being who you're meant to be around those people. Right? And like,
and even surrounding myself with people who I know are
good point. Yeah.
have integrity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus people that I might not be able to trust. And
good.
Yeah, there again, it becomes almost, I hang around people who model it for me.
Yeah.
That's another way that I learn it.
And I would say if you don't have a strong sense of integrity, you may not be able to see a lack of it very well, but it's not that difficult to see it when it's done well. Like, even if you don't have strong integrity, everyone knows who's trustworthy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, even if I'm not trustworthy and I'm shifty and I don't show up when I say I should, and I cheat people out of their money or whatever, I know that guy has integrity. And I know if I want something and I want to trust somebody in a transaction, I'll go to that guy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So even if you're struggling with, like, I don't know if these people are good for me or whatever, at least, like you said, you can surround yourself with people that are exhibiting that. You can seek out those types of relationships. The other thing I really like that you were saying about playing the instrument and practicing is sometimes you make, you play it wrong, or you make mistakes or whatever. And that's kind of what I was trying to say earlier, is practicing involves some ugliness, involves some bad choices or whatever. I don't know if choices is the right term and thing in terms of practicing, but I guess that's kind of what I was saying. It's like, if you go to the bar this weekend with your friends from college and you realize this doesn't really align with who I want to be, again, that's practicing. That's going, oops, wrong note, let me try again.
Yeah.
Right? Or maybe you're able to exhibit your integrity in that setting. I don't know. I can't speak for that. But I can say, like you said, surrounding yourself with people who have integrity versus not is going to produce that integrity more reliably.
And I think in hearing what you're saying, I also want to add that I don't sit here myself recognizing that I haven't messed up at times in integrity. And in some ways, I have probably learned more from when my integrity has been lacking than, or how important integrity is by doing it wrong and experiencing that disappointment in other people, when it's like, oh, you can't trust Mark for that. Or, oh, Mark said this. And I think about it even, especially where my kids are concerned, how important that is. And for you, can you think of a moment in your time where it's like, in that moment, integrity became something you desired to acquire regardless of what it cost?
Yeah, so this gets very personal for me, but as a teenage boy or whatever, I looked at pornography pretty regularly, and I would say I was addicted to it. And it got to a point where I mean, this is why this is such a passionate topic for me. There was two versions of me. There was the version who I knew I was, the person who couldn't say no, and then there was a version I projected, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to align those things. I didn't have the tools or understanding or training or what have you to figure out how do I make these things become one. You know, and it wasn't until just before we got married and my wife basically challenged me to say, hey, do you struggle with pornography, was essentially the question. And in that moment, I had a choice of whether to cover it up or whatever. You know, just do what most guys do. And I'd like to say I was too smart for that. I'm not taking that credit. I think it was God's grace in my life. But I was honest with her, and I confessed my struggles to her, knowing that if I didn't, our future marriage could be jeopardized by my addiction, my habit. Also knowing that if I was honest with her, that could also jeopardize our relationship. Like, she might not want to be with someone who's like that. And at that moment, that was the first time I'd ever shared the truth of who I really was completely with another person. And the freedom that brought. Well, first I'll say she was very gracious. She forgave me. She vowed to help me in our marriage and to be a partner in that. And that's a huge part of this equation, of course, God's grace in my life through that situation. But through that, I understood the value and the freedom that comes from smashing those two versions of myself into one. And the value of confession, the value of accountability. And so a big part of integrity for me that helps me to maintain integrity and practice integrity and grow in integrity is accountability on a regular basis, where I meet with people and I confess where I'm being wrong, and saying these are things I want to work on. If it wasn't for that, then I would start to split again. I'm fairly certain, right? Because I'm always wanting to be this better version of myself. That's not going to change. That's an important part of growth, I think, or it's just desiring to be a little bit better than you are, But I'm never going to be able to achieve that if I'm not measuring how I am. Sure. And that's a big part of what accountability is. But anyway, that moment in time was where, the difference between having two versions of myself and then one understood by someone else, completely integrated, the value of that was fully understood. Now, obviously, I still had many years to come of being a young 20-something and not exhibiting integrity in many other ways, and learning that same benefit of integrity in the area of sexual integrity could also bring freedom in all these other areas of my life, whether it's comparing to others or, just approval addiction, all those things. So,
along that line, I'm recognizing that in your experience, when you demonstrated integrity in that moment and Megan demonstrated acceptance, that trajectory, if you will, went well. Yeah. What would you say? We're fine. What would you say to someone who desires to demonstrate integrity, but when they tried it, it didn't work well? They they lost an opportunity. You follow me? I do follow you, yeah. They were honest on a resume and they didn't get the job. Right. They were honest in an interview. And what would you say to someone, a young adult?
Yeah. I mean, that's hard. That's a hard thing to say, well, just do it anyway and have integrity. And I think to walk over to their side and step into their shoes, I would think, I mean, that's what you're getting at. Like, how is this possibly worth it? And at that point, you kind of just have to trust those who have come before, right? Like, who have said, I've done it both ways, and having integrity is so much better, and here's why. And that's where those relationships come back into play. And so that would be my encouragement, is if you're in that situation, is to seek out a Mark Pratt, or someone in your life who is further along the journey than you are, and they can say, here's why what you did matters. Here's why what you did is important. And here's why, if you would make a different choice or change to not have integrity in that area, here's what likely will occur in your life. I think it's a very difficult situation, but I do think having those relationships in your life are so important for that. It's, again, comes back to accountability. Someone to say, here's an objective perspective on what you're going through, and what would you say to that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's what kind of brings it to mind, is the fact that we will not. Integrity is learned over time, because we will not. It's not an instantaneous process. Just because I'm demonstrating integrity in this moment doesn't mean that I'll suddenly find the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow instantaneously.
That's good.
And I think being able to recognize there is a benefit, a long-term benefit, to demonstrating short-term integrity on a daily basis. And I don't think, I think it's kind of similar to planting anything.
Yeah.
We plant an apple seed, but we don't get an apple at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And I think as we continue to plant the apple seeds of integrity in consciously making the small integritous choice, we plant an orchard over time. Mm-hmm. But we're not going to reap the benefits of that fruit instantaneously.
Yeah. It's the reaping and sowing principle.
Yes, precisely.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes the difference in my desire to demonstrate integrity, even if it doesn't instantaneously pay off. Mm-hmm. That I recognize, there's gonna be some difficulty. I'm gonna lose some friendships. In that journey towards integrity. Mm-hmm. But yet there is a looking back, it's the times when I demonstrated integrity that are more beneficial, even though the short term didn't make it seem so.
Yeah, and when you ask the question, it just makes me think of, like, my own daughter. She's 14 years old, almost 15. And, like, there are some things, like, in terms of integrity or whatever, where it's like, I know I'm asking her to do something or to believe something that she doesn't yet have proof of in her life. Mm-hmm. Right? So, like, when I think of that person who's just entering the workforce and the resume thing, whatever, that situation, it's like, I can understand the difficulty because they don't have the past to look back on and say, this works. And so to me, that's where it becomes difficult. It becomes much easier as you start reaping what you sowed, right? Either direction, really. I mean, if you sow the lack of integrity and you reap the consequences, it's easier to go, maybe I should do this right next time, although that doesn't always happen either. But, and vice versa, like, if you sow integrity in this situation and you continue to do it, you will see the benefits. There's not a doubt in anybody's mind, right? Yeah. And I can certainly say from my own life, just seeing just the benefits of having of living out integrity. Now, again, I don't want this to be heard as someone who's like stuffy shirt, that whole thing, but as someone who consistently tries to be real. And so even in my own career, to be able to say, I can't do that thing you asked me to do. I don't know how to do it, but I'd like to learn, right? Mm-hmm. That's real. Like, I don't know how to do this thing. I'd love to be like, oh, yeah, I got this or whatever, but I don't. I don't know how to do it. But at the same time, you're my boss. You want me to do it, so how can I... It's the little things like that, you know? And I see that so often in some of the younger guys in my career, where I work and stuff, where it's like they project that they can do more than they can, thinking that somehow that buys them some credibility, when really you borrow from future credibility, you know, and you don't have it yet. And then when it turns out you can't do the thing, well, now it's all gone. Like, your credibility is below whatever could have been. Yeah, you're in debt, exactly. And I've lived through my period of that for sure. But kind of turning the corner to saying, you know what, it's okay. I'm not perfect at everything, and when I'm gonna just be real. I've seen the benefits of that in my career from then till now. You know, and yeah, because number one, you seek out opportunities where your integrity is appreciated. You know, it's usually a good guide. It helps guide you away from bad opportunities and towards good opportunities, because you're not going to look for you know, like an Enron type of...
I hear you. Yeah.
I mean, I made that one up. I'm sure most people there didn't have a clue that that was a thing. But I'm just saying, like, your integrity will guide you towards good opportunities, because your integrity will be rewarded.
So what's the difference between integrity and wisdom, as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, so I feel like integrity is kind of the practical outworking of having wisdom, right? I feel like it's very difficult to have integrity if you aren't attaining wisdom, or if you don't have wisdom. I'm not sure they're...
Wisdom may tend to allow you to see the benefits of integrity.
Yeah.
Over time.
That's very true, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing all those insights on integrity.
Oh,
I mean, really.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's my hobby horse.
Yeah, I was thinking of that same phrase. And then, so as we wrap up, what would you like? What's your final thought on the importance of your hobby horse?
I mean, I guess my thought would be that if you are struggling in this area of integrity, and it can be any end of this spectrum, right? It can be like I talked about. I struggle with pornography. You know, that's likely a large portion of our audience, all two of them. You know, I mean, that's a very common issue. Or it could be just at work, like you tend to fudge the numbers once in a while, or taxes, right?
Taxes,
it's
sure.
like the government doesn't deserve my money, so I'm going to hide whatever. Like, it can be any number of things. What I would encourage you to do is just start trying integrity. Just try it. Yeah. And I mean, you can't just try it and then like you said, the next day look in the pot and say, oh, there's no plant. You know, you gotta let it grow. But start planting integrity and just see what happens. Because I guarantee you will reap benefits from it. It's a guarantee.
That's fair enough. The reaping and sowing.
You don't often get a guarantee on this podcast.
Yes, indeed. So that's how we see it.
I love it. Good job. Hey, thank you for listening to our podcast. If you like how I see it, please do all the things that podcasts tell you to do. Subscribe, rate, review, follow us, and or talk nicely about us on social media. If you want to reach out, the email is us@howiseeit.click. Yep, I said .click, as in .click. Please tell your friends about this show, and we'll see you on the next one.